In progress.
Okay, well, let's get started. All right, good morning, and again, happy Friday. All right, we're going to dive deep into today's segment in conversation is the tenant representation and broker compensation agreement, better known as Form TRBC. TRBC. Now, when is this form utilized? This form is utilized anytime you're having a conversation that will lead into an applicant that wants to lease or month to month. Okay. It's no difference than a buyer representation agreement when they're looking to purchase, right? Purchase a home. They got to go through the motions of, sitting with them, consulting with them, and then if they're interested in purchasing, the layers of the steps, right, is getting pre-approved for a loan, then having an agreement that says that I will be representing you for a certain period of time. Well, in the lease world, it's no difference. With all of the changes that had happened back in 2024, these forms were loose, meaning you didn't have to necessarily get them signed. It was optional. Okay. Meaning that if you sign it, great. And if you don't, that's okay. You can still represent a tenant and go through the motions of finding, identifying, negotiating, and ultimately get them a location, right? Well, back in 2024, around the summer of August, everything changed. And now it's mandatory for each and every real estate professional working with a tenant, you must have an agreement in place. And it's really just a protection. And it sets the tone and it sets the barrier of what the next is, right? And that way they have mutual understanding of what your position is and your position as well when working with the tenant. Now, it's a very simple form. There's really not much, but it gives transparency, right? At the end of the day, it gives transparency when it comes to the do's and don'ts and what the form is. And then there's no way of misunderstanding or misinterpreting this form because it's already layered of what the expectations are at the end of the day. And it starts with like with all of the forms is the data preparation. Okay. That's the day that you start this document. Doesn't necessarily mean that's the day that the tenant is going to be signing, but the day you start this actual form. Now, here's my thing. When it comes to getting leads that are coming in and people calling you, wanting to rent a place or they find a property and they inquire, they call you, hey, I want to know about this property out in Carson. It's on 123 ABC Street, and it looks like it's going for $4,500 a month. Then you go on the multiple listing service, the MLS, and you start researching. You find out, okay, you got all of the information. You find out who the listing agent is, and then you reach out and ask, is the property still available, right? If it's active, then most likely they're still receiving applications, right? Now, this is already has already started, right? If you're out there hunting for leads when it comes to properties to identify to, provide to your clients, you've already set the tone and standard of having this agreement signed and executed by your applicants, right? Because you've already had the conversation either over the phone and then you said, here's how the process worked before I can even continue. I need to have a tenant representation and broker compensation. Now, the key here, right, is compensation. And immediately you're saying, is the tenant responsible to pay me commission? And the answer is, everyone, yes. Yeah. The agreement says that the tenant is responsible to pay you compensation. So it's like, wait a minute, wait a minute. I thought that the landlord would pay us compensation. Well, the truth of the matter is everything is negotiable. And the landlord can pay or the tenant can pay you as well. It could be a combination of both. But when you submit an application, you're also going to submit a request of compensation for the landlord to pay your commission. And we'll talk about it a little bit. Yes, Jojo.
How would you bring this up to your client? Like before you how would you present it? Like what would you think?
Present what? This agreement?
Yeah.
Well, it's a consultation. So you're going to come in either to the office. You want to kind of know what their expectations are, right? One, do they even qualify, right? That's going to be the key element to it. Maybe they're wishing or they're just inquiring. So you want to set the tone and immediately start scrubbing if they even qualify, right? And the essence is, as professionals, our goal is to find qualified people because we're not going to waste our time, energy on someone that is not able to qualify, right? And what I mean by qualify, do they have a job? Do they have the credit? Do they have a co-signer sometimes, right? Do they have reserves? There's so many variables. Do they have references that the landlord, the listing agent may be asking as well for the process to see if they're going to be the ones that are going to be the ones actually occupying the residence, right? And the residence can be single family residence, it can be condo, townhome, it can be mobile home as well, and maybe even businesses, right? Especially in the commercial realm. Now, this form is a generalized form that just explains what the mutual agreement between you as a real estate agent and the tenant that you have, right? And then how you navigate this is obviously the consultation aspect of it, because if they're not willing to sign an agreement, then you're basically maybe not going to get compensated because if the landlord doesn't pay compensation, because remember, nothing on the MLS shows now compensation to you if you bring a qualified tenant, right? So the essence, we have to, explain this now to the tenant that the tenant is responsible to pay. But there's language in here that says if the landlord or anyone else pays you compensation, then it credits the tenant from their obligations to pay us. Now, remember, commissions are negotiable, right? And I always want to start, with the highest. I think you guys are all worth lots of money, right? But what's the standard? Well, the standard is 2.5, 3%. Why not go for the top and say, I want to get 3%? Well, and remember, when it comes to leases too, there's really not much money, right? Especially if it's your average 35, 45, $5,000 home, there's really not much money to be made on leases. You still do a lot of work and you're still liable for a lot as well. So it's kind of a balance. It still gets you into the trenches of understanding the process, not as a purchase, not as a listing agent selling a property, but it's kind of the same process when it comes to a buyer. It's a tenant. A seller is a landlord, right? It's just not exchanging real estate, if that makes sense, right? So let's go into the process of what the tenant representation agreement looks like. As I mentioned, data preparation is the date that you actually prepare this form. The right to represent, these are the individuals that you're going to represent. Anyone that is 18 years or older. Okay, repeat after me. Everyone that is 18 years and older. So if someone is 17 years or 17 and a half years, are you able to draft this form and have that 17-year-old kid or gal sign? No. Okay, because they're not up in age yet. 18 years is fine, right? So keep that in mind. Remember, that was part of our real estate exam, right? So you want to make sure that whoever is going to be renting the applicants, you have to get everyone signature and agreement. Okay. Typically, it's a mother, a father, parents, right? Siblings that are moving, or it may be friends that are looking into renting because they're going to a local university or college, and they're getting themselves together so that way they can have a place to live, and which is close proximity to school or even work. Okay. So the right to represent is the individual. As you can see on the right side, it talks about tenant. All right, so the tenant, and then the next is the grants. Okay, so it grants the employment. Okay, so the employment of your real estate company, right? Well, here in Torrance, we're considered Keller Williams South Bay, right? So you would put Keller Williams South Bay. Now, the beautiful thing is, and I would also emphasize and check with your DRE, right? If you go to your corporate Department of Real Estate's website, type in your corporate license or your company license, most agencies have more than just one name, better known as a DBA, doing business as. So if you don't want to just be that South Bay agent, right? We have other DBAs that you can use because the license number will coincide with all of the DBAs. So maybe you're an agent that wants Keller Williams Luxury or Keller Williams in general, right? Then as long as it's an approved DBA under the corporate license, then you can use that as part of it. So it doesn't look like you're just a South Bay agent because maybe all of your business is in LA. Maybe your business out in the San Gabriel Valley. Maybe your business is out in Orange County, but it just doesn't make sense for them to see that you're a South Bay agent, if that makes sense. Okay. But for the sake of today's class, I'm just using Keller Williams because that's the one that pops up every time I type it. So, but you get it, right? If you're part of the Long Beach office, right? LA Coastal Properties, right? If you're part of the Valley office, right? You're going to use the Valley Luxury office. If you're part of the PV office, right? Then you'll use the KW Palos Verdes office. And I know that they also have different DBAs that you can use because some of us is like, I don't want to go and put Keller Williams Realty South Bay and if we have a KW South Bay and it's part of our DBA, guess what? You can use that as well because that's still in compliance. Because if this document or documents or transaction ever gets audited, right, by the Department of Real Estate, we want to make sure that because they're going to look at everything, they're going to see, okay, is this a DBA? So they're going to coincide with the Department of Real Estate's website to see, is this a DBA that is part of the company, right? So just want to stress and emphasize. The exclusive right to represent the tenant in obtaining a lease or rental for property described below on the following terms and conditions. Okay. So number 2 goes into the terms of representation. The items in this paragraph are contractual terms of the agreement reference based on this grid. Okay, so the grid is kind of similar to the grids on the purchase agreement, the grids on the listing agreement. I like it. When this was introduced to us 4 years ago, it was like it's just an easier way to reference things, right? Like, okay, where do I go for this? It says paragraph 7B, and then you can go down the form and see, okay, 7B talks about this. And it gives you a little bit more clarity on how you're articulating the conversation with the client. Okay. All right, so the grid goes into different segments here, right? So terms and conditions, right? The paragraph, terms and condition. So when you're sitting down with your client and explaining why you need this form signed and executed is because right now I am unemployed. Okay. I don't have a written agreement with you, so therefore I'm unemployed. Until you get this executed by the clients, then you're employed, meaning now you're going to work for them because you have a mutual agreement setting the tone and standard what that obligation is. I'm working for you in respect. My job is to identify, navigate, and ultimately, right, find the right property for you and ultimately get the deal close to the finish line, right? Well, in this case, it's rental. So it's a different ballpark, right? You can probably get this done within a week, 2 weeks, depending again on the listing agent and the urgency of the landlord, right? Most regular transactions are usually, right? Usually 30 days. But when it comes to rentals, it's a lot less time, right? And you may have a landlord that is in desperate need to get this place rented, and it just makes work. And you get prorated where they're going to move on the 15, but we start the momentum on the 1st of February as an example. But because they need to already start moving, maybe they're moving out of state, you're prorating some of the agreements to align on their wishes. Okay. So the representation period goes into, all right, so what does that look like? Okay. Because let's just say you put a 2 week representation agreement, right? And I've seen agreements where they put, well, it's only 2 weeks of it. Well, what happens after 2 weeks?
You're not entitled to it.
It expires. It expires. So remember, when you're doing a representation agreement in place, is how much time do you want to spend with these clients, right? What is the norm right now that you should be putting on leases? Yeah, around 3 months, 6 months, maybe pushing a little bit too much. And, it's different when it comes to purchases, right? If it's a purchase that, yeah, I would say 6 months is probably the norm, just in case you got those ups and downs where you're submitting offers are not being accepted, or the deal falls apart because there's issues with the property and then the buyer decides to back out of the deal. And now you're going back to square one. So you want to give yourself that buffer, right? And get that time frame so that way it aligns with the closing of your escrow and the buyer representation agreement. But when it comes to leases, guys, it's a little bit more different, right? And the beautiful thing is that the MLS does provide you with a lot of different categories, right? Single family residence, manufactured homes, townhomes, condominiums, so on and so forth, right? So it gives you a perspective to, identify and really anchor and talk to your clients of what are we looking for? How many people are we going to be occupying the property, right? If it's a family, right? A mother, a father, and 2 kids, right? Then maybe a 3 bedroom or 4 bedroom home may be doable for them, right? This is where you need to ask the questions so you get a better understanding, because you're not going to go show a 1 bedroom, 1 bath condominium on a family of 4, right? So you got to understand the elements of what you're trying to accomplish here. So that way, um, it's concise, you have happy tenants, and you're negotiating with the listing agent and the landlord to ultimately get them into a property. The next goes into the type of property, right? Which is section B1. So it goes into the different parameters as I explained, right? A single family resident SFR, or if checked, if it's not an SFR excluded from this agreement, then you would check this here. But for the sake of today's class, we're going to leave it as a default that it is considered a residential home. Or if you want to be more specific, is that they may be also looking for a condo, apartment style, townhome style, right? So you want to check and emphasize of what that is. So that way you're really detailed exactly of what your client's wishes and wants, right? Because if they're saying, I want a townhome, but you're showing them condominiums, before you know it, they're going to say, look, this is probably not the right fit because I keep emphasizing I'm looking for a townhome style, not a condominium, or vice versa. Why are you showing me condominiums and townhomes when I want a single family residence that I need to have a backyard because I have pets? Right. So that's where you want to sit down and really get the details of what your client's wishes are. So that way there's not a disalignment on it. And now you lose a client because you're just not seeing eye to eye. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Apartments, mobile homes, if it's industrial, now we're going into the vacant lands, commercial, and so forth. So this form is for all, okay, not just for houses and condos. This is also for commercial, right? Maybe your client is looking to open up a business, right? Or a restaurant and they need a restaurant location. this is the same form that you're going to utilize, right? So it's a one uniform a tenant agreement in place that sets the base in the conversation as you're going through the negotiation period. All right. The next section goes into locations. Okay. And it says cities. It says city and cities. Okay. Now, this is why I want to stress, and also really it's critical, in my opinion, is because in the past, I've been in so many different scenarios and situations, and it really surprises me. Remember, I said earlier, right? What did I say earlier? These were loose. These were not agreements that we were mandatory. We didn't have to. Some agents would, some agents wouldn't. And that was perfectly fine because it was not mandatory. Now, since all of the changes, guys, we have to use this because then you're out of compliance. And we have a checklist of items that indicates of all of the stuff that you need in order to have a completely, fully approved transaction and file for you to get paid your compensation. Okay. So part of this is, all right, what are the parameters in place that I'm trying to seek? And this is, again, when I'm sitting down with you, I want to know, okay, what areas are you looking for? Okay. Well, I'm looking for the South Bay. Okay, well, the South Bay has multiple cities, right? Can you get a little bit more specific on that, right? And the specific is you can put one city or you can put multiple cities to emphasize, because the problem here is, and these are some of the loopholes that I want to explain to you, is that if you don't protect every layer and you just put the city of Torrance as an example, right? And they find a property in Harbor City or Carson, they can say that part of our agreement was only the city of Torrance. And therefore, I am not responsible to pay you compensation because that's not what we had agreed upon. Does that make sense? So when someone says South Bay, emphasize, and I know it's a little bit more typing because, again, everyone has their different perspective of what South Bay is. Okay. Now, South Bay, in my opinion, if I was to circle the map, I include, Carson, I include Harbor City, right? Lomita, Torrance, Redondo Beach, up in the hill, all of the coastal cities, right? All the way to El Segundo, all the way up into Hawthorne, Gardena, is considered the South Bay. So it depends. Is San Pedro considered South Bay?
Yeah.
Okay. How many people say San Pedro is South Bay? How many?
With 19.
How about the city of Wilmington? Is city of Wilmington considered part of South Bay? Okay.
No.
Okay, because everyone is going to have their different perspective in opinions when it comes to South Bay. Okay, even though it's attached, some would say and argue, no, Pedro is not considered. That's part of Los Angeles. Wilmington is part of Los Angeles, right?
So is Harbor City technically.
Technically speaking, right? So, and that can change the trajectory of the conversation. If someone is not wanting to pay you compensation, they're going to fight tooth and nail to say, no, that's not part of the South Bay, right? So you want to make sure you really stress and you document everything, right? Again, type everything. All right. So if you want South Bay, are you saying that if I find anything, even the surrounding area, write it down? I know it's a little bit more paperwork, but you're just covering your basis. That's all you're really doing, guys, is just covering your basis. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So then we got through the cities. You're going to check the section here that says cities, and then you're going to put the specific cities. Because remember, if you only put two cities and they end up buying in a different city, then technically they can say, I don't have to pay you. Okay. And I just don't see anyone doing that to you, especially if you put time and effort and energy. There's still good people out there that'll do right and still pay you your compensation, but then you got some people that are not so by the book, and they may dispute that and say, look, that was not part of the city that I agreed to, so therefore I'm not entitled to pay you. And I'm talking about the tenant paying you compensation. Make sense? All right, section B3 goes into additional descriptions, right? Maybe they're looking for a pool, maybe they're looking for a two-story, maybe they're looking for a basement, maybe they want to have a view, emphasize and stress of what that looks like, just so that way you're in alignment, right? And because any little thing can alter the conversation, and the whole goal is to really have a secure agreement so that way you get paid for your services. Okay. All right. Section C goes into additional tenant preference. Okay. Are they looking for a lease or are they looking for a month to month? Right. That's crucial and very important, right? So you want to stress and emphasize. And the beautiful thing is when you're consulting with your clients, sit and go through this. Hey, okay, what are some of the preferences? Do you want month to month or a lease? I'm good with either or. Okay, so both. So if I can find someone that is willing to do 1 year, we'll do it. And if someone doesn't want to do 1 year and they want to go on a month to month, you're good with that, right? Then emphasize and put both. Okay. How many is the minimum bedrooms, minimum bathrooms, right? All of this is also important for you when you're jotting down and when you're doing research right on the MLS, right? You know exactly what you're looking for. Okay. Because if someone is telling you, I need a minimum of 3 bedrooms, a minimum of 2 bath, and now you're showing a 2-2-1, that's not what they are agreeing. Okay. Now, the question here is, I get this quite often. Well, Simon, if you put 3 bedrooms, 2 bath, and they go find a house with a 4 bedroom, 3 bath, does that mean I'm not going to get compensated? Okay. I don't know. It's one of those kind of situations is that if someone is really pushing, they may, say, well, that's not what I agreed to, right? So then
The word minimum.
exactly. So then what you want to do is push it up and just have that conversation. Okay, a minimum is a 3 bedroom, 2 bath, but what if I find you a 4 bedroom, 3 bath, or even a 5 bedroom? Yeah, I'm okay with that. Okay. So then you want to push it all the way to the very top because that's the minimum. And they're willing to also look at different, and you want to type all this too as well, right? Even an additional description, they're good with the 3 bedroom, 2 bath, but they're willing to go all the way up into a 4 bedroom if necessary, or maybe on the reverse. Maybe they're okay to find a two bedroom, right? A 2 bedroom, 2 bath home. You want to put that as well, so that way you have clear, concise understanding that they're easy and they're willing to bend a little bit to make it work, right? Again, I'm just trying to give you as much detail so that way they don't come back and say, I'm not going to pay you, Jojo. I know you spend two months, but I just don't want to pay you. And then that's kind of the reason you want to have a secure agreement in place that will give you the position to really say, I disagree with you. I have an agreement with you. So here's my bill for my services and compensation. Okay. Make sense so far?
Yeah.
All right. All right. I think we have someone on chat. Hey, Simon, can we list the county instead of cities? Yes, 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 yes. I know on the lease buyer agreement, excuse me, on the lease tenant agreement, it doesn't. So on additional description here, just put, Los Angeles County, right? So there you go. All of LA County, all of LA County, right? There you go. That covers all of the city, all of the county of Los Angeles, right? This one doesn't have it like the buyer representation agreement, but remember, think outside the box. What loopholes am I missing? What loopholes am I missing? What loopholes am I not seeing that the tenant may exit, right? Now, I don't want to emphasize and stress so much of tenants because, again, as I said earlier, there's really not much money. But I also want to protect you because when you're good at this, guess what? You're going to be better at buyer representations agreement because you're going to lock in, you're going to be really dialed in, and you're really going to be able to have really guarded agreements in place that there's no loopholes for misunderstanding and misinterpretation on your buyer. And there's, they're going to work with you and or not, right? Because you align the agreement in such a really tight conditions that I'm obligated to pay. Now, remember, as I said, we're going to try to get the compensation from the landlord, but also want you to understand that the responsibility falls on the tenant, not necessarily the landlord. Okay. All right. So next it goes into the broker compensation section D. Okay. The amount of rate of real estate commission is not fixed by law. They are set by each broker individually and may be negotiated between the tenant and the broker. Okay. You are the agent representing the tenant. So you're negotiating the terms of what you want to be compensated. Now, it says clearly that the rate of commission is not fixed. So what does that mean? It means that there's not a fixed term, okay? You can charge whatever you want. At the end of the day, the tenant is going to be responsible to pay. Now, you got to be realistic, right? You're not going to put 20%, okay? But if they sign an agreement and say, yeah, I'm okay to pay 20%, okay? But I'm just throwing curveballs that you got to be realistic, right? What we see quite often is 2.25, 2.5, 2.75, 3%. On some occasions, you may increase, especially like vacant land. Price points less than 100,000, and I see 8%, 10% because there's really not much money to be done, right? So really just depends on the situation. You may be the listing agent that has a 10% listing on a vacant land, but the vacant land is only $25,000. So imagine $25,000 on 2.5%. It's peanuts, right? That's why you increase the commission because it's not fixed. It's all negotiable. Okay. So for today's class, I just put, it's for a fixed term lease. It's 3% of the total rent paid due or a flat fee. So you can put a flat fee or a percentage. Also, excuse me, if it's a month to month. So if they're in agreement, right, to do both lease or month to month, then you want to cover basis, right? So if they're okay with both, you want to go here and do both. Again, here's a loophole because if they say I'm okay with a year lease and you negotiate terms, but the landlord doesn't want a year lease, they're only willing to do month to month, and you only check fixed lease and not month to month. Again, if you have a savvy tenant, they're going to say, I'm not responsible to pay because the agreement says that it's only on a fixed term lease. I wanted a lease. You didn't give me a lease. I'm okay going month to month, but you didn't check that. I didn't sign it. I didn't agree to that. Therefore, I'm not going to pay you 3%. Yes, sir.
So let's say an example is signed, right? Just exactly how you have it right now.
Yeah.
After the owner, landlord, and the agent say, yes, your client's approved, are we gonna fill this out again and then put the percentage like up there of the number or not?
You mean when you submit the application with request of compensation?
Like after everything, once you're like, okay, I guess the easiest way to put it right now, I have a client literally waiting on the owner to just say, yes, she can move in. When she said, because she already signed August is signed.
Okay.
So once I get the yes from the agent, am I just getting my client to go over there, drop the deposit and get the keys? Or am I sending in another one filled out with like, because you see where it says 3% of, but now she's doing the lease.
So this is for leases.
Who's paying your compensation? The landlord?
She's gonna pay the.
The tenant?
Tenant, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, what,
My question was those, you see those boxes right there?
These right here?
Yeah, I just couldn't see from all the way here, but now reading it, it says or, so that's a flat rate.
yeah, you could.
Yeah.
put in a flat rate as well. Put the percentage. So in your particular case, the landlord says yes, accepts them as a tenant, okay? You now will end up presenting then your tenant the amount, because your compensation is for the whole duration of the lease. So let's say it's 12 months
A year.
okay, on whatever percentage that the seller has agreed to. But let's say your compensation comes out to $5,000. Let's just use enough. Okay, you know, at that point, you then are able to say, based on our contract, okay, that you then signed, okay, it is X percent of the total monthly rent of the total 1 year lease, which comes out to this amount. So in addition then to the amount of money that you now owe the landlord to move in of X amount, you now also owe you, X amount of 5,000.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Steve, for clarifying that for him. All right, so there's another little section here that if you check this box here, it says tenant shall owe no compensation. Okay, so let's just say that the tenant is tight, right? And going through the consultation, they're telling you, look, I'm willing to work with you, but I'm not willing to pay you. So if I don't pay you, my goal, I guess, here would be is that the landlord pays you or the tenant pays you. Excuse me, that the landlord pays you. So in theory, if you're going to go in this direction, once you check that and the tenant signs it, then they're not obligated to pay you any compensation, none whatsoever. Now your goal here is kind of a gamble that you're going to get the the landlord to pay you compensation. Okay, because you check that the tenant is not obligated to pay you compensation. I would encourage you not to check that. Okay, because if you don't collect what you are worth, then you can always go back to the tenant and get the difference. So let's say you submit the application plus the compensation for getting a qualified tenant, right? And you put in the 3%, right? And then the landlord comes back and says, no, I'm not going to pay you 3%, but I'll pay you 1%. Well, the tenant is still responsible to pay you the difference. And that difference is 2% that the tenant would have to bring to the table to make this deal work, right? Because you're stressing and emphasizing that this agreement is between you and the tenant. Okay. So if the landlord brings in a certain percentage, then the offset amount is still the tenant's responsible. Now, I get this quite often, and it's probably a question, and let me double check if it is. So Simon, can we list? Okay, yeah. Can you have both check? Yes, Emilio. Yes, you can. Alicia, could you provide a simple verbiage for charging a flat fee to a tenant in case where the housing provider does not offer broker compensation and the tenant chooses to proceed? Well, yeah. I mean, the simple conversation. Remember, it's either percentage or flat fee, right? So if you're going to say to the tenant, hey, you know what? I won't charge you a percentage, but I'll charge you a flat fee of $500, $800, $1,000, or whatever that amount, that you're going to put it here instead, right? So let's just say you're going to put, I'm going to charge you $800, right? So then you would have to, remove the percentage out because now you're just asking for $800 flat fee. Okay. I try to keep it at 3% because remember the percentage is based on the annual income. So if the annual income on a rental, let's say it's $5,000 per month, you times 5,000 times 12 will give you the annual income, and then that's the percentage that you would get. In this case, as I mentioned, it's 3%, right? 3%. So if it's 3%, then that's the amount that I'm going to collect from the tenant, right? Now, if you want to say, well, if I don't get the percentage, can I still charge the tenant a flat fee? Yeah, the answer is you could, but now you're going to add it into other terms. Other terms is down here. Okay, that's where you want to now clearly on the verbiage says that if the landlord does not provide me with the percentage, then ultimately the tenant would be responsible to pay me a flat fee of $800. And you want to have that on section E as additional terms, right? So that way the tenant is crystal clear that if we don't get the percentage, they're still responsible to pay you something. And then in this case, a flat fee, as Alicia was indicating on her text message. I hope that kind of answers your question. All right, and remember, tenant shall owe no compensation. Okay, I would not check that, but maybe it's a family member um, that you're doing. Okay, you're welcome. So in some instance, yeah, you may go in representing a client that will not pay compensation, and you're hoping that that the landlord pays. Now, what happens if the landlord doesn't pay, right? And the tenant is not paying you compensation because it's a family member that you're just doing it in good faith to help them, move into a place. Then the question here is now you can revert back to the tenant and says, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, I submitted the application. They came back that they will not be paying me compensation. I know that we don't have a commission because I checked that you're not going to pay me a commission. Therefore, two things can happen here, right? I can now take myself out as a represented agent, and now you're considered a non-represented client, and therefore you can work directly with the listing agent and work the deal with the listing agent because I'm not going to get paid. Therefore, I'm not going to be liable if something happens. So I'm pulling out. And then that's where you would create a termination of the tenant agreement, meaning that you're terminating the agency agreement with the tenant. Okay. Then that's a different conversation, right? Or the tenant may say, look, Simon, you work so hard. I appreciate all of you, what you've done, but I still want you to represent us. Maybe this property may not be the right fit. Let's go find another house or condo or townhome. Okay, not a problem. So then you reach out to the listing agent and basically say, look, unfortunately the tenants have decided to not pursue this, and we're rescinding or backing out of this agreement. And what's the reason? Well, the reason is, part of my agreement with him was I was not going to be charging him. I tried to submit a request, for compensation because I'm getting zero commission from the tenant. I was hoping that your client, the landlord, would pay me, and the response is, um, the landlord is not going to pay me. So after having a conversation with my clients, they just decided that I worked so hard on finding them that they just feel more comfortable working with me, and they don't want to go as a non-represented, or they don't want to work with you directly. So therefore, we're backing out of the deal, and that's perfectly fine as well. And then you go find another property that will pay you compensation. Make sense? Okay. We have someone else on the chat. All right. So Lily says, is there a car form that could be drawn up if there should be additional conversations on details for compensation? Lesser landlord, buyer, seller. So yes and no, Lily. There is a form, and it's really just an addendum clarifying exactly what are those terms are. There's not a very specific form, But you can add an addendum to the tenant representation agreement. So that sets the tone of what the conversation or what we're trying to accomplish as part of the condition. All right, so the next section is payment received by broker from housing provider. So what is a housing provider? That's the landlord. Okay, that's just a different lingo now. It's the landlord, but they're trying to eliminate it. And I should also remove landlord because apparently people believe that landlord is kind of discriminate. Yeah. So it's like, how is it a landlord? Why are they considered a lord or a land? So they're removing landlord, and we've been using landlord forever, right? But now it's considered housing provider. Okay. It's the soft way of saying landlord. And I can't go back and remove all of the conversations about me saying landlord. But it is now considered a housing provider, which is an owner that owns rental investment properties. Okay, so I said it. All right, so it says the following: if broker receives compensation from housing provider or other, the amount due broker for representing a tenant shall be credited. Okay, so there's the lingo, there's the language against the obligations to pay the broker, right? So if you submit the application and all of this information, and the housing provider says that I'll pay you the 3%, then bingo, it's squash. The tenant doesn't owe you no compensation. Okay. But if they owe you less than that amount, then the tenant is still responsible to pay you the difference. But Simon, what if they give us more than 3%? Well, that would be foolish, right? But let's just say that they do give you 4%. Then are you allowed to collect that additional percentage? If you say 3 and the housing provider says 4, are you allowed to collect that additional compensation?
Rewrite a whole.
There you go. Yeah. You just got to do a modification. Yes. You know what? What did I say earlier? I said you guys are worth more money than ever, right? So if that's the case and the housing provider is willing to provide you with more, then 100%, guys. Yeah, all you have to do is a modification of terms, increasing your compensation from 3 to 4%. And that covers you, and you can collect the additional funds.
You don't have to get the signatures again, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. From the tenant.
But if you don't change the paperwork, you're not entitled to.
That's right. You're not entitled. So the only avenue would be, and it just doesn't make any sense, that credit can go towards the tenant's deposit or something. But again, this is leases and month to month. It's not an actual purchase. So all you do is modification of the tenant representation agreement, indicating you're increasing your commission compensation from 3 to 4%. Make sense? Okay. We talked about other terms. All right, so when we go back and look at some of the lingo here where it says, the different paragraphs, right? I want you to also emphasize where it says D1 and it says number 3 here, right? Okay, that is talking about this paragraph, right? So when you look at amount of compensation, what does that mean? What are we talking about? Okay, then you go to the actual section of paragraph number 3. And it just goes into, again, as it said here on the gray area, and that commission is not fixed. They're not set by each broker individually and may be negotiable, right? And then it goes into section A and B, right? Advisor real estate commission includes all compensations and fees to broker that are fully negotiable. Broker right to compensation. Broker shall be entitled to compensation specified on 2D1 from the tenant if during the representation period, right? And that representation period, I put 3 months here, right? Because if let's just say that it's April 10th. And I have April 9th. And we secure an agreement the following day after this agreement. Technically, it's an expired tenant agreement. So therefore, I mean, it depends on the scenario, and if it's already locked in, you don't want to be that agent that realize, oh gosh, I forgot. You should be looking at these agreements and timelines, folks. So that way, if it is getting close to that expiration and you still haven't identified a property, get an extension of time to push this agreement for a future date. So that way you're in alignment to it, because once this expires, that's it. You're not entitled to compensation. Does that make sense? Okay. Got it. You guys are great. My life is easy today. Thank goodness it's Friday. All right. So number 4 talks about the agency relationship. Part of the agreement you will also still continue to sign. And I'm gonna ask Steve, because Steve has been in the industry a very long time. When you started your real estate career, did you have the agency agreement then?
Not when I first began my career.
Okay.
Buyer agency came into play.
Hmm. Not the agreement, the agency agreement, the AV form.
He came in back in, I think it was early 90s.
Yeah, that's what I say. Because when I started my career, I remember that was always incorporated as part of the listing agreement, part of the purchase agreement.
I had next to nothing nice.
You only had a one pager, right? Yeah. Yeah, thanks. So the disclosure is fixed term lease is to exceed a 1 year. Broker will be provided a tenant with a disclosure regarding real estate agency, better known as CAR Form AD, as soon as practical. Okay. What does that mean? Anyone? So it's, as soon as it merits, right? If you know it's going to happen, you want to get that AD signed, because that's an agreement. That's your employment as well. On top of this tenant representation agreement, to be in compliance, there's still agency, right? The duties and responsibility that I, as a real estate broker or salesperson, hold, and the duties and responsibility of the tenant or the buyer or the seller. So it's another form that is part of the checklist of items that need to be signed. And then obviously the possible dual agency with seller. I don't know why they have this on the tenant, but basically the possible representation agreement of one or more, basically you still have the right to represent multiple tenants and submit applications to the same property. That does not uh, 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 call a conflict of interest, because a tenant may say, well, that's a conflict of interest, Simon. You can't be working with another tenant that is also submitting an application on the same property. You're my agent. You shouldn't have done that. No, no, no. That's why you have these type of agency agreements, to protect you from these situations. Does that make sense? So as an agent, yes, you have the right to work with multiple tenants and submit applications to the same properties that client 1, client 2 may be also submitting. Okay. It's a very rare and far and few, but it's there as a protection to you, that in case you do have two applicants that want the same property, right? And where I can see this happening is you're the listing agent, and an applicant is calling you because you're the listing agent, saying, hey, I'd like to submit an application. Okay, wonderful. Do you have representation? No. Are you looking for representation? Yeah, you can represent me. Okay, then you submit on, the paperwork. And then another call comes in and they say the same thing, right? They don't have any representation. And you said, okay, I can definitely represent you, but here are the forms. That's the protection. That's the clarity where they cannot say it's a conflict of interest. We're fully disclosing to you, hey, I'm the agent, which I'm helping the house provider rent this place, but I also get calls on a lot of tenants that are looking to submit applications. So I'm just being crystal clear that it's not just your application, but it's your application, and so on and so forth. Make sense? Number 5, broker authorization and obligation. Broker is authorized to diligently represent the tenant in any resulting transaction for the property entered during the representation period. So whatever that period is, you have a commitment just like the tenant has a commitment to you. It's a mutual agreement. And if they break that agreement, then they are responsible to pay you compensation because they broke this agreement. Now, in order for them to exit this agreement, they have to reach out to you and says, I no longer want to work with you. Okay. And therefore, you have the ability to terminate this agreement with the tenant. And sometimes it may be the best thing, right? Now, if something is, kind of sketchy, right? And they're doing it because they're trying to avoid compensation, bring your brokers to the table and let's dissect it together to kind of see if that's the case, right? Because maybe we can negotiate and say, look, we're willing to terminate, but it's gonna cost you, because we spend time on this, not that we're asking for the 3%, but I'm willing to get some type of compensation. And then that'll give you the right, because nowhere on the contract today to say about cancellation, right? Nowhere on the contract, right? But can you cancel? Yeah. Guess what? They can fire us, but guess what we can do too? We can fire the tenant too as well. I don't want to work with these tenants that don't want to work with me, right? So if that's the case, then I'm releasing you as my client, terminating the agreement. Bye bye. Go find people that want to work with you. Okay. And then the same thing for tenant obligations. Tenants will act timely and in good faith to communicate and cooperate with the broker regarding any material issues or factors in resulting the transaction during the period. If requested, tenant shall provide relevant personal and financial information. So they have responsibility just as much as we have responsibility too as well. Does that make sense? Okay. And then the last part of it is the acknowledgement. Tenant has the tenant has read, understand, and has received a copy. You know how many times I get complaints from clients saying, I never received a copy of this. It's your job, folks. People on Zoom, it's your job to make sure that if they're signing this, that they get a copy. Now, the beautiful thing with technology, which I still it's efficient as, your DocuSign, your e-signatures, but they're just click, 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 click. They're not understanding as it says. But once they get a copy of a DocuSign, one, they're saying that they read, they understand it, and that they received a copy, right? And for the most part, when they do sign a DocuSign, a receipt will also be provided to them as well, right? So it's not like you have to do like back in our time, right? We had to do carbon copies, or we had to go copy. We had second copies, and we have them signed, wet signatures, our originals, and then we would give them a copy of their signature. It was just the way it was back then, right? Because we used to use fax machines, right? For the younger, yeah, yeah. The younger generation is saying, "What is a fax machine?" That's a different class, by the way. All right,
In technology.
that was high-end technology, yes. And then you get the tenants to sign, and then the broker's information here, and you as the agent, not me, I don't sign these agreements. You are the one signing. Okay, so don't say, oh, this is a broker signature. No, it's here because it's my document, but it's you. You will sign on behalf, and now once the tenant signs, you sign. You have an agreement in place. Okay. Right. Questions, thoughts, or concerns regarding today's class? Yes, sir.
One of the things I really want to point out for the agents when you're representing tenants is contract to sign is making sure that your job, just like when you represent buyers, is to now be able to present those tenants in the best light possible to the landlord.
Yeah.
Okay. If you just go through the motions and just say, oh, they like the place and submit an application and then just wait for a response.
Yeah.
Okay, it is a high percentage that it may come back rejected because they really don't know much about the tenant. Because understand, unlike a home purchase, the landlord, quote, housing provider or property manager on behalf of the owner of the property.
Right.
Okay. They now are looking at it of your tenant is having an ongoing relationship. Okay. They're looking for two things. I know because A, I used to be a property manager and I'm a landlord. Okay. I'm looking for two things. If I'm going to accept your tenant, is A, what is their ability of being able to make their rent? Okay, where I don't have to go chase the rent. And B, what kind of tenants are they going to be living in my property? Okay, so you should then end up setting the table, making a representation as part of your, let's call it offer package, just like you would do if you were representing a buyer, to be able to say, here are tenants that would be fantastic in your property, and here's the reasons why. And you are able to show them, they're moving because their existing, owner is selling the property or whatever the reason being, that's the reason for the move.
Right.
Here are pictures of their home, of how well you can see they maintain their home. Okay. You can see they are paying X rent. They have been consistent. Here is letters of recommendations. Okay. And you want to put them in the absolute best light, okay, to be able to do that. On the same token, then, when you're working with these potential tenants, okay, based on their income, you need to know about, ratios as well. That if their income, okay, is total monthly income is $5,000 a month total income, and they're looking at places to rent at $3,500 a month, all right, it is going to be a high probability that any landlord or manager will not accept them, because just like a lender qualifying for a loan, we typically use the 33% rule. No more than 1/3 of their gross income is to be allocated for the rent. So don't go show them, okay, places that are in excess of that. It's, because you don't make enough money on these leases for you to be spinning your wheels showing on properties that you then probably will not get paid because they will be rejected.
Yeah.
So part of it is making sure you understand, doing the homework and explaining to them, here's the reason and reasons why.
That's right. Thank you, Steve, for sharing. Yes.
To add also regarding did it say school districts, it's important that to know the difference, if it's a Torrance address, like if
Yes.
it's considered a Torrance district area or PO box, because a lot of times you have parents that it's like the reason for the move, and make sure you do your, because
Yeah. It happens.
regarding,
Yeah, and that happens on purchases too as well.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I got was, what if it's multiple adults, right? Because this agreement has signatures for two tenants. But what if it's a mother, a father, and two 18-year adult children, right? Are they supposed to be part of the agreement? Okay. So are they supposed to be part of this buyer representation agreement?
Yes.
Okay. Let me emphasize a little bit. Okay. The tenant agreement, okay, the tenant representation and broker compensation. Okay. I'm not saying about the application. I'm not saying about them being on the lease. I'm saying about this particular agreement. Are we putting the two adults that are going to be the ones handling the finances, or is it going to be all four, meaning the mother, the father, and the two 18-year-old that are still in college? Are they going to be on this tenant representation agreement?
Just one thing.
Okay.
No, just the parents, just the two adults.
Yes, okay. For clarity, yes, because remember, the compensation is from the individuals that are the responsibles, right? I mean, it's only common sense, guys, right? You're going to see parents that are going to be the applicants, right? Even though on the lease and the application, you have to put the adults for references because they're 18 years and older. So that, yes, you're going to include them. But for the sake of this particular form, you don't need to add the adult children, just the responsible parties, right? Which would be the mother and the father who are probably working or the kids are still in school or college, right? So to address the question, it's just the parents. Now, what if it is 4 people, right? And it's 4 adults, maybe it's I don't know, 4 college kids, right? That you are working with and each and every one is responsible, then yes. And if that's the case, then you're going to put all 4. Now, the way you can do this is one or two ways. One, you can put 2 on one line and 2 on the second line, or you can do 2 tenant representation agreements. Meaning you do one, boom, boom, to applicants, and then do another one, boom, boom, with the other 2 for a total of 4. Does that make sense? It may be a little convoluted, but remember, it's a file. Everything is going to go in there. So you can either put here as an example, right? You're going to put one, one and 2, and then 3 and 4. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So first name, second name, third name, and fourth name all in one. Now, when it comes to the DocuSign, it's not going to work. Now, what you're going to need to do is print and then wet signature. Okay, or 2 DocuSigns, right? And then 2 wet signatures to be in agreement. Because here, look at how long the line is, right? The line is good for, you can put 100 signatures if you wanted to, and I'm just exaggerating, but you can put 1, 2 signatures, 3 and 4 signatures as an example, right? Or you can just print 2 of these agreements and then have tenant 1, tenant 2, second form, tenant 3, and tenant 4. Make sense? I hope that kind of answers the question. I think that was from Alicia. All right, team. Well, that concludes today's class. I hope this class was of value. If you have any additional questions or anything that comes up, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. With that, have a wonderful Friday afternoon and a wonderful weekend, and I will see you on the next contract class. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks, Caesar.